Right, good evening, everybody. I think we'll get started because it is just after 7 o'clock. I think we've got a smaller number on this evening because miracles do happen, and it has actually started to dry up and the sunshine has been out. I'm hoping that's the same in across all the different nations because that wasn't the case last week. But tonight I'm delighted to bring Tim, who manages Wessex Water Catchment Partnerships and Delivery Teams, which work with farmers and other catchment stakeholders in nutrient and pesticide sensitivity, river catchments and groundwater source protection zones across Dorset, Wiltshire and Somerset. That sounds quite a big task, Tim. He's worked for Wessex Water since 2014 and has a particular interest in sustainable livestock production, and he came from a practical beef and sheep background. In 2019, he completed a Nuffield with the title, How Can Farmers Keep Nutrients Out of Water? So I'll hand over to Tim to talk you through all about water quality for beef and sheep farmers. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you very much for inviting me along to speak this evening. Can you hear and see me all right?
Yeah, good. I can hear you fine.
Okay, well, I'll just go straight to my slides. And Katie, questions? I'm happy to take them as we go, or answer them at the end.
Yeah, if anyone's got any pertinent questions on the particular element that Tim's talking about, then either use the raise a hand function or pop it in the chat, and we can ask as we go through. That should be fine.
Great, thank you. Well, I've titled my talk Water Quality Impacts and Solutions. I'm going to major on the solutions and practical ones, hopefully, and also finish up with a little bit of a look down the road ahead at what might be coming water quality wise. Like Katie said, it's Dorset, Wiltshire and Somerset I'm covering, and my colleagues within the Wessex Water Catchment Management team that are working with farmers. But I've tried to kind of make everything as relevant as possible to farmers across the UK and Northern Ireland. A little bit about my motivations and interests. Brought up on a beef and sheep farm in Devon and studied agriculture at university as an undergraduate, and then more recently having done a master's in sustainable agriculture. And so farming is very much my interest and my passion, inside and outside of work. And the map on the left, I think, shows quite how much of the landscape is farmed, and so anyone that's interested in rivers and water quality, has to make sure that they can work with farmers, because ultimately farmers are the biggest influence on land management at a national scale. So the map on the right, UK and Ireland river catchments, fascinating map to kind of see where you are on that. Some very big watersheds and some much smaller ones, but they all have particular features and things that make them precious, and they all have particular issues, and that's going to be one of the things I sort of point to tonight, is about making sure you understand what the issues and priorities are in the catchment where you farm. So working for a water company, as privatized entities back in the 80s, we don't have any regulatory powers. We are working with farmers on a completely voluntary basis. We offer free advice and information, and in some cases grants, but we don't have any ability to make farmers do anything in England. That's the Environment Agency. So we are kind of the carrot as opposed to the stick. I'll mention now the Nuffield Scholarship I did. I was very fortunate to be awarded this, and I would definitely recommend anyone else interested looks into it and then applies. I looked at my specialist topic of nutrients and water, and I was fortunate to travel for about 13 weeks in total to about 10 or 12 different countries across South America, North America, Europe, and Australia and New Zealand. And I won't go into sort of all the findings now. You can see the summary of that on the YouTube link there below, and more detail in the report. If you just Google Tim Stevens Nuffield, you can find the report and the YouTube link. But as an example, one of the things I was interested in was different ways that government regulate water quality, and you've kind of got the two main approaches there with Denmark and New Zealand. And Denmark have very heavily regulated the inputs, a bit like we have NVZs or similar, whereas in New Zealand they've allowed more freedom to farm as you wish, as long as your nitrate losses in particular are below a certain level. And there's pros and cons to both approaches. And then on this particular one, I was sort of highlighting the support for water quality research that the industries had in Ireland, because ultimately we need the evidence to be able to make sure the regulations and the incentives are going to work, because otherwise we can be making some quite fundamental changes to farming and land use, and it not to have the desired effect. So Nuffield have partnered with the Royal Agricultural Society of England and Elizabeth Creek Charitable Trust to summarise Nuffield report findings by theme, and the one that my Nuffield report recommendations have been summarised in is the nutrients water one. Again, you can find that online, and that's just sort of a shot of one of the recommendations that's mentioned in there. I wanted to acknowledge, though, that beef and sheep farming has got a lot going for it in terms of water quality. It's often quite extensive and often lower nutrient input than other farming systems, and being higher nutrient input in terms of fertilizer or manure isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's how you do it and what you get out of those inputs that really matters. But they are generally at that lower input end, although it's a wide spectrum, being grassland dominated, generally lower pesticide use, although there are exceptions to that with grassland herbicides that I'll mention shortly. Most beef and sheep farms don't generate very much slurry compared to, say, dairy farms, and although you've got to use farmyard manure carefully, it doesn't usually have quite the same issues as slurry when you've got too much of it or at the wrong time in the wrong place. Grass compared to cropping gives you all-round ground cover generally, unless there's been some particular soil erosion that's occurred. And where it is intensive, it's often part of a mixed system, and that's something I'll talk a bit more about when we talk about nutrient balances. And then plus all the other benefits of livestock farming and grassland systems, from carbon sequestration in soils and all the biodiversity benefits of having grazing ruminants. So let's sort of think about it in that context. The water quality issues that I get involved in, and I think are common across the island, the UK and Ireland, but are now we're going to go through. But nitrate isn't an issue everywhere. It's generally in the more intensive lowlands, which have had a history of going back from the Second World War, from ploughing up of grassland to arable, and then nitrogen fertilizer use when it was at its peak in the 70s and 80s, and has declined since. But catchments like we have in Dorset and Wiltshire, where we abstract a lot of groundwater from the chalk aquifers, generally that's very clean water. We don't have to treat it very much, but it does suffer in some places from this high and rising nitrate trend, and in some places that's starting to tail off. There's quite a big time lag, sometimes several decades between the peak nitrate use and when we see the peak nitrates in the groundwater, because in some of these chalk catchments, the water table might be 40 or 50 meters underground or more. That's an example there on the screen of a major water supply for a Dorset town, and basically everything you can see in that picture and beyond for a few kilometres influences what we pump out of that borehole. Wessex Water has about 1.7 million customers across Dorset, Wiltshire and Somerset for drinking water supply. We're a larger wastewater treatment company because we also service Bristol and Bournemouth, but they have their own water supply only companies there. So if you live in Bristol and Bournemouth, you have your sewage treated by Wessex Water, but your water supplied by separate water companies. And one of the reasons Wessex Water worked with farmers is 20 years ago we were looking at having to install these nitrate removal plants at various water treatment works around the county. That's one where we had to do it. They cost several £1 million to install, and then an awful lot of money, hundreds of thousands each year to operate, because they're very energy and chemical intensive, and then they produce this useless briny solution with the nitrate that's been removed from the drinking water, and then that has to be treated and disposed of. And so they're all round a bad thing. They're bad cost-wise for us and our customers. They're bad for the environment with the energy use, and with the waste product. It doesn't produce even a fertilizer that could be used. And the other point here is that if in these groundwater catchments, if we don't abstract the water, it's going to come back out the ground eventually in chalk springs and work its way down into sensitive habitats, like in our case, Poole Harbour, where those mats of algae are fueled by excess nitrate. Some of that is waste from sewage treatment, and there's a lot that we as a water company have had to do to reduce that nutrient loading, and the farmers in Poole Harbour are also doing a lot. But the algal mats cause all sorts of issues for the species that live there, wading birds, etc., as well as depleting the water of oxygen. So if we're doing this for both human health reasons, because there are strict drinking water standards for nitrate, but we're also doing it for environmental reasons. Phosphorus is often in the opposite places to the groundwater catchments, is usually where the heavier soils are and where you've got more surface water bodies. And this is a picture of the Somerset levels and moors, which Natural England have designated in poor environmental or ecological condition, and that's driven by too much phosphate. And other examples of that around the country, most notably Loch Ness in Northern Ireland, River Wye, and it's a complex issue. It's sort of taken many decades to get to this point, and it'll probably take many decades to solve it. But you can see on the right there the phosphate status of an area in Wiltshire, and probably the green areas are the lighter soils, freer draining, whereas the orange and red areas are probably the heavier soils that drain into the rivers more. And you don't need much of these things like phosphorus. That's an American example, but just to sort of visualize it, that 1 pound of algae is about the size of a softball, which I think is about the size of a grapefruit, and 1 pound of phosphorus can support 500 pounds of algal growth. So it doesn't take a lot to unbalance these freshwater ecosystems. And often the phosphorus losses go hand in hand with soil and sediment loss. That's an estimate of that gully that's created by soil erosion, and sizable amounts of soil being lost, and often with the phosphorus attached to it. And we in Wessex Water, we're a team of catchment advisors, so like myself, how I started off as a agriculture background, and to go out and advise farmers, share information like this on the screen with them, and then run grant schemes and so on. But we've also got a team of catchment scientists and technicians who are out there collecting soil and water data, and then analysing it and trying to sort of quantify the issue and where it's occurring. And so in this example, the farmer kindly allowed us to put an edge of field runoff monitoring station in. So the flume there measures the flow of water. The auto sample of the grey container is where the samples are stored, and when the water's running off, it captures a sample every 15 minutes or so. And then when we know that, then we send those samples off to the lab. That tells us what the phosphorus concentration was in that water. When we know the flow, we know, like in this graph, between say 6 o'clock in the evening and 10 o'clock that evening, 19 cubic meters flowed through that point, and with it 25 grams of phosphorus. And we can then multiply that up to what that was on a per hectare basis, because maps on the left, like this one in the top, allow us to work out how many hectares of fields were channeling into that particular point. So like I said, the evidence is important. You can't do this everywhere. These are costly, but what we try to do is install these where we can then use the data to sense check the models. There's a model by ADAS called FarmScoper that's used quite widely to measure, calculate what a particular farm or field's phosphorus losses are, and then we can use this data to sense check it. And what we found is that model FarmScoper, there's loads of variability between fields and years, as you would expect. You have wet years, dry years, and it's very rainfall driven. But when you average it out across lots of fields and farms and across different years, it's generally, in our case, not coming out too different to what we're seeing at these. We've got about 8 of these runoff monitoring stations around the county, around the region. So I'm not saying all models are accurate, but that's what we're trying to do, and then share this information with farmers, and also then share information about the effectiveness of the measures that farmers put in place to address this are. Other water quality issues that we come up against, not necessarily caused only by agriculture. This is a picture of a cryptosporidium pathogen, the red dots under the microscope, that can cause sickness in humans. And the reason I got a picture of a weir on the left is that's a weir on the River Avon, just before it goes past Bath and then out to sea in the Bristol Channel. And that's become a very popular bathing water spot, and it hasn't yet been designated, I don't think. But the point I'm making there is that upstream of there, Wessex Water's got about 40 sewage treatment works, I believe, and there are an awful lot of farms as well. But there are also roads and septic tanks and industry, and so, but the public are increasingly wanting to swim in waters, and there are more and more bathing waters being designated. And so it's another reason for farmers and the water industry to work together to try and deliver what the public want from their rivers. But it's not easy. Water companies come in for a lot of criticism over storm overflows. We've got a major program of investment in addressing the impact of storm overflows and the number of times they discharge, and that runs into several £millions a month. We're currently investing in that, but at the end of the day, all of our jobs, whether you're a farmer or a water company, are made harder the harder it rains. So I just sort of thought I'd share that as something that I'm dealing with more and more. And then the final one I just wanted to raise is pesticides. I'm not going to do too much on that tonight, but there are pesticides that cause us issues in our region. Some of them can be treated. but add cost and complexity to the water treatment process. Others are quite hard to treat, and so then potentially we could have to take a source out of supply, and with all the consequences of that. So we work very closely with farmers on pesticides. And just legislative drivers. This is for England, the Environment Act, but this has a target for agriculture in England to reduce nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment pollution into the water environment by 40% by 2038. So that is quite a stretching target, and it remains to see how that's going to be measured, whether it's at a farm scale or a whole industry, country scale, and how it will be measured as well. But it's the sort of similar direction of travel in other places around the UK and Northern Ireland. So this is the sort of onto the what you can do and where. And this diagram is about phosphorus, but I'd say a lot of the principles apply to the other things I've been talking about as well. And the key point being that it's no good just tackling one of these parts of the pathway from field or yard to the watercourse where the impact is. Ideally, the solutions will be at all stages of that. So addressing the source, so that's sort of looking at inputs and not leaving behind more nitrate after harvest going into the winter period than you need to, for example. How do you stop the phosphorus or the soil particle leaving the field in the first place? So things like cover crops come into that, but anything that will hold the soil together. How does it then get to the watercourse, the delivery transport phase? So this is where things like buffer strips and looking at your farm tracks can come into it. And then finally, what is the impact it's having, and can anything be done? So could a sediment trap before it enters a watercourse or a ditch, for instance, mitigate it there? So as I go through I've got pictures of a few examples of the things that farmers in the Wessex region have done, particularly to address phosphorus losses. And yeah, keep that diagram in your minds as I go through them. Any questions or anything so far, Katie? No. There we go. The first one I wanted to do, having promised you photos, it's now a graph, I apologise, but there are photos coming, is about nutrient balances. And this is for the UK over the last 25 years for nitrogen and phosphorus. And this is the difference between what's coming onto farms in feed, fertilizer, anything else that's being brought onto the farm, bedding, etc., livestock themselves being brought onto the farm. And it's the difference between that and what goes off the farm in meat, milk, grain, etc. And the orange line is the difference. And you can see there's been a generally positive direction of travel. That reflects more awareness amongst farmers of the need to plan nutrient use and be efficient in how it's applied and at what rate. But you can see that it's still running well above a balanced situation for both nitrogen and phosphorus, and that surplus for 1 year probably doesn't make much difference. But if you run that annual phosphorus surplus of, let's say in this case, 5 or 6 kilos a year every year for decades, or in Somerset we've looked at, or Lancaster University have looked at historical agricultural census data, and they reckon Somerset has been in surplus for phosphorus since 1870. So if you run a surplus for 150 years, then you accumulate a big stock of total phosphorus in the soil. Only a small fraction of it is available and is measured by your soil test, but there's a big pool available there to gradually leak out in drains and into the water that way, or run off attached to soil particles. And so that's the sort of the phosphorus. Nitrogen, probably most farming enterprises are always going to be in surplus to some extent, but looking at your protein content of rations and reducing nitrogen fertilizer use by use of more legumes, etc., can help you bring that surplus down. But the other message here is that it's not just about inputs, it's about outputs as well. So productive, efficient farming is a good thing for getting towards a balanced system. It's not all about de-intensifying and in the cases where we've got high stocks of soil phosphorus, the way to bring that down is to farm it out and to be maximizing your crop offtake relative to the inputs. It's not yield at all costs, but it's efficient farming. And then it's sort of a snapshot from my Nuffield as well. In America, they term it as 4R nutrient management or nutrient stewardship. I visited Iowa, where there's a major focus on reducing nitrate losses to the Mississippi because there's big algal blooms in the Gulf of Mexico where the Mississippi comes out, and Iowa it's farming mecca with the productivity and the range of livestock and cropping that they've got. But these are sort of the core messages that are equally applicable to us in the UK as well. So I won't dwell on these because nutrient management and planning is a topic in its own right, but all of those are key principles in terms of water quality. And then how do you do that? Well, we've got RB209 in the UK, and there's recently for England and Wales been a digital version of that released that I believe is going to be released to Scotland as well soon, and that basically is an online version of RB209, and so matching your inputs in terms of manure and nutrients and properly accounting for the nitrogen and phosphorus in manure when you're planning your fertilizer is a crucial step. But other things as well, which come back to just good efficient farming, is about regular soil testing for knowing your pHs and optimizing a pH and soil fertility that way to maximize nutrient utilization. So that's a few bits on the nutrient management side of things. Moving on to thinking about your farmyards and farm infrastructure. These are some pictures of improvements that farmers in Wessex have made with some support from Wessex Water. Covered manure stores on the right to replace field heap storage, and that basically means that you're not tracking across fields during the winter to tip the manure and causing the rutting and issues that way, and then you're not getting the leaching either surface or through field drains from the actual manure piles. Obviously, there's a cost to that, but in the phosphate sensitive catchments, that is one solution that some farmers have done. And then on the left, you've got a sort of a lower cost solution, which is to sort out yard runoff by upgrading gutters and downpipes, and in that case as well, a concrete curb apron to stop fouled water mixing with cleaner yard water. So again, I'm not going into huge detail on all the different options there, but those are examples of where, if you look around your farm, look for those opportunities and grants if they're available. Similarly, looking at tracks, troughs, gateways. These are some examples of where farmers have upgraded the heavily used or trampled areas. And I would say the key point here is, like on the concreting of the track, it's no good just concreting the track in its own right. You've got to think about where's that water going to go. And so cross drains, sleeping policemen, swales to direct the flow into for it to soak away. You don't want to just create a runway to the river for whatever's on that track. Although having a hard surface will clearly reduce the amount of sediment that you're creating from vehicles and livestock. I wasn't going to go too much into the arable options tonight, but a lot of beef farmers would grow maize. And so one that we've promoted heavily over the last 10 years is undersowing grass into standing maize. And that, I wouldn't say, has become common practice, but there's a number of farmers now around the region who are doing that as standard, sometimes with a grant from a water company or government, or sometimes without. But obviously, when you've got livestock to feed as well, you're getting another crop from that field that can be used before then it goes back into maize or whatever. And so, yeah, we are seeing good results generally from undersowing grass into maize, and we've done quite a lot of work with the Maize Growers Association on techniques, seed rates, varieties, timings, drills, etc. I'm happy to share that, point you towards more information on that if you're interested. Soil compaction is a really big one, and this is where flooding and trying to mitigate runoff that causes flooding is a big one. So a spade, and looking at the soil structure and what's happening beneath, and then if it needs addressing through grass and subsoiling, for instance, then doing it. But that's not, the standard solution. You need to sort of see what you're dealing with first, where the compaction is, what the soil type is you're dealing with, and so on. But anything that improves infiltration is generally a good thing. In England, we've now got this alert tool that anyone can use. If you Google it, the Environment Agency have published it online. I think it's a basic version compared to what their officers and catchment sensitive farming advisors can use, but it's still a useful way of knowing where your flow pathways are on your farm in relation to watercourses, and then go out and ground truth it and see how that matches up with your knowledge of the reality of where water goes. And the little blue lines, the darker blue lines, are where they reckon it ponds as well. So this is where it's about identifying where the critical source areas are. So where's the soil most likely, or the nutrients most likely to be in excess and likely to leave the field, and then where's the areas where it's going to most easily get to the watercourse. So, and then targeting your action to those places, whether that's with your spreading risk maps or with your plan to reduce nutrient and soil losses. So, and there are other tools that you can purchase that will help you do that as well. Another thing going for beef and sheep production is that arable farmers are starting to bring grass back into arable rotations. That could be in the form of a herbal ley like the one on the left, or it could be in just ryegrass ley like the one on the right. But that both of those fields were in arable rotations, and then the farmers have put them into grass for 3 years or so, for all the reasons that arable farmers might do that, from weed control to building organic matter. But yeah, that's, again, going back to mixed farming, a positive from a water quality point of view. Fencing livestock out of watercourses is a really common one to be recommended. Our catchment technicians have done surveys of when livestock cattle are actually entering the watercourses and for how long with farmers' permission. And yeah, it's variable. There are some stretches that they don't spend long in or access at all, and other places like the ones in the picture where they're going in a lot. And this, I hesitate to say an easy win because it's only an easy win if you've got an alternative way of providing water, I appreciate. But we certainly work with farmers to get more watercourses fenced off. And if that needs an alternative water supply, then we will help where we can. But that's both a sediment, a bacterial issue, and a nutrient issue. And it's obviously when they're in the watercourse, excreting direct into the watercourse, and the churning up of the soil as well. And then thinking about intercepting those flows. So the picture on the left is a cross-slope hedgerow, just to try and intercept some runoff from that. I think it's a maize field. And ideally that would be on a sort of a bund that helps it be a physical barrier, but just as that grows up over time, that rougher, more vegetation will help intercept flows. And then on the right, I'm not sitting here telling everyone they should turn their farms into woodland everywhere, but for select areas, slopes, harder to farm areas, then tree planting can be an advantage. And I think the farmer in that picture on the right told me that that was a woodland before his father, sort of up until the Second World War, took the wood out, and now he's reinstated it. So that's another option that may be suitable to have in the toolbox. This is something we've been doing more of in recent years. So in-ditch barriers like the ones on the left, and I believe that those little dams there on the left haven't been in for very long, and yet a lot of sediment had accumulated in that short amount of time. Admittedly, it's been a wet winter, but then the one in the middle is interesting because that's what we call a two-stage ditch. And yes, there's been a bit of land take with that, but the theory behind that is that you've got the main channel, the previous ditch, but then the bench bit that's been excavated to the left, once that vegetates, will act as a sort of a wetland area, and you'll be getting the sediment dropping out in the deeper bit, but then the vegetation in the higher bit will help take up some nutrients and further intercept what's flowing down there. So that's something that we're just starting to try on a few farms. And yes, there's a bit of land take compared to the previous ditch, but it's not as much land take as if you dig a whole big pond or wetland in your field. And then the one on the top right is a pond restoration. So in some parts of the country, there's a lot of locations where there used to be ponds, and now they've either sort of been purposely filled in, or they've just sort of filled themselves in over time. And so opportunities to restore them. If it's in a field corner like that, the wet area anyway, probably, then there's not necessarily a big land take from that. The holes you can see in that are where we've been measuring the sediment accumulation in that. And then leaky dams aren't generally what we'd consider for nutrients. It's more a sort of a natural flood management technique, but we have been seeing them trap quite a lot of sediment behind them as well, more than we were expecting. So that's a before and after photo there. So again, that's sort of like a win-win situation there. I'm nearly done here. The pesticides, I just wanted to draw your attention to all the resources of the voluntary initiative around grassland pesticide use, and there's a lot of advice and sort of best practice regarding that. one thing that we've done is run a pesticide amnesty in one catchment in Somerset, and had some really good uptake of that, where we've collected the unwanted old pesticides for free and anonymously, and then it's not a risk anymore, and it sort of is sort of one less thing for the farmer to lose sleep over as well, about what to do with it. So we don't offer it everywhere, and this isn't something you can sort of everyone around the country can access, but if at the very least we can point you in the direction of a approved pesticide disposal contractor. So yeah, I just encourage you to think about a plan for dealing with those old unwanted pesticides. As long as they're there, they pose a potential risk. Sheep dip. Just wanted to flag the code of practice, and that as water companies, we are very keen to see farmers using sheep dip correctly, and the contractors that do it. And so, yeah, good that there's so much guidance on best practice with that, and appropriate disposal. But that definitely can be a real water quality risk if it goes wrong. And then I'm not going to go through everything on this page, but just the different organisations that are involved in water quality or can offer help around the different countries. You've obviously got the farming unions representing you, and can be a good point of contact if you want to find out who can offer help or grants. You've got different government legislation, which I'm sure you'll all be aware of, wherever you're farming, and different regulators and different regulatory approaches. In terms of advice and information, we've got AHDB in England, we've got catchment sensitive farming, and then I've been watching with interest in Northern Ireland, the soil nutrient health scheme, as that rolls out, and then in Scotland and Wales you've got so you see in Farming Connect as well, probably missing lots there. But in terms of water companies, worth finding out who your local water company is if you're in England, and in the other nations, being aware of what your water company can do. I would say for us as Wessex Water, we're not working with every farmer in Wessex, and our activity is very targeted to the catchments where we as a business have identified an issue that we feel working with farmers would benefit from. And so it's not sort of a universal solution help for all we can offer, but the farmers who are in those particular catchments, then we try to help as much as we can. Coming up for 7:45 here, so I'm just finishing up, but there's more and more farmer groups, the landscape scale collaboration. We've got farm clusters. We're seeing more and more of them form, not necessarily in response to just water quality issues, but they often operate at catchment scale. So from our point of view, we're very keen to support formation of that and see farmer leadership. Environmental Farmers Group is taking that a step further, and they're like a cooperative for trading the farmers' natural capital. Then Poole Harbour, sort of that's an interesting one, because the Environment Agency introduced a nitrate leaching loss target for farmers in the Poole Harbour catchment of South Dorset, and rather than the Environment imposing that as a regulation, the farmers have formed their own group, Poole Harbour Agricultural Group, to deliver the nutrient management scheme, whereby they are calculating their nitrate leaching losses, but they're then aggregating the results and reporting them in aggregate to the Environment Agency as opposed to individually. You don't have to be part of that group. You could report them direct to the EA if you want to, and then working with EA, they've got a glide path target, so that they're gradually working, the target gets tighter every year, and it's an interesting approach. The Environment Agency are now looking to roll that out in parts of Hampshire and Wiltshire. But for phosphorus, it does rely on an accurate and usable tool to calculate. It's another thing for farmers to do, administrative hassle. But in this case, it's been about farmer voluntary action, working together to head off potentially more stringent legislation. And then the River Wye is an example of landscape recovery, where at a very large landscape scale, they're working together to try and deliver change at our landscape scale and attract funding accordingly. Just to finish off, there's a few others there that I'd encourage you to look at. ABP, obviously, supply chains doing more and more with its producers to support sustainable actions, as is, I put in AIC there, representing all of the feed and ag chem and fertilizer suppliers. A couple of examples there, using a basis qualified facts advisor for your nutrient management planning, or going on a course yourself. And then also, it's not just farmers and farm managers that we want to see with good knowledge. It's the tractor drivers who are driving the manure spreaders or slurry tankers. And so Lantra have developed a one-day course that you can put your tractor drivers on to give them the training they need. And then, worth getting to know who your local rivers or wildlife trust is. In the Southwest, we've got Farm and Wildlife Advisory Group. It's got its farmer membership. Mention there of landlords. We work quite a lot with Duchy of Cornwall tenants, and the Duchy of Cornwall, as their landlord, is very keen to support the uptake of water quality measures. So it's worth a sort of a conversation with your landlord about how they can help. And then there's a voluntary initiative, as I've mentioned. A look across to Ireland, and Chagas have got a lot of good information. And then there's the Farm Pet, which is a platform for putting a lot of information on. And then what's coming down the tracks, just sort of for you to be aware of, is more focus seems to be on, like I said at the start, bacteria and viruses and things like Cryptosporidium. Also then, what are the, which of those are carrying with them antibiotic resistance as well. Vet meds, that's not just farming, there's flea treatments for dogs and things, and swim in rivers, but there is more testing happening now for those. So vet meds and water quality. We gave a talk to a group of vets the other day, so they're starting to take more interest in how they can support water quality improvement. Climate change, it's raining harder, so, and then the opposite problem in summers like the last one. And so the problem being at low flows, then the nutrients are more concentrated, and so when the temperatures are highest. So by loss of pesticides, I'm talking about losing pesticides from the armory because of water pollution, and then regulation is only getting tighter. In England, we've got those Environment Act targets I mentioned, and local loss limits. There may in the future be restrictions on applying more manure to soils that are already at high P index. In England, we're seeing more Environment Agency inspections of farm infrastructure, and that can then trigger investment required, particularly for the dairy farmers in slurry and silage stores and silage clamps. And then potentially coming down the line is environmental permitting regulations like already exist for larger pig and poultry farms being applied to the larger dairy and beef farms. So that would be a cost implication at the very least. And then more and more of the supply chain requirements. So I'm sure the ABP team can talk to you more about what the retailers are looking for. And then I mentioned there beavers re-wiggling and riparian corridors, which is probably not the best way to end. But I'm not promoting any of those things, but I'm just sort of flagging that we're seeing more and more beavers in rivers in Wessex, either through them just making their own way up the watercourses, or through legal release, or through beaver bombing. And so my advice there would be, just if you feel like they're coming your way, just prepare yourself, and by getting as much information as possible, contacting the Rivers Trust or Wildlife Trust. They can offer training, like if you do a one-day training course, that maybe the Wildlife Trust can help you go on, then your license then to remove the dam if it's in the wrong place, if they arrive. So, and I mean, there's more and more focus on trying to re-wiggle previously straightened rivers, create riparian corridors, etc. So all I'm saying there is just sort of be aware of what may be happening, what moves may be happening in your catchments, so that you can do it on your terms, or not do it, but based on being properly informed. And then my final slide really just summarizes what I already said, which is about the 8 P's of water stewardship: prioritize, plan, address the point sources, which are typically farm infrastructure, leaky manure stores, etc. Protect your soils from compaction, prevent those soils and nutrients leaving the field, then be precise with your inputs, intercept your flows, and then ultimately it's about being profitable. So getting free advice where possible, knowing when to pay for advice, and then being aware of what financial support there is available, so that you can make the best business case for it possible. And on that, I'll stop and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Tim. I didn't realise there was actually as many beavers. I've just actually Googled, and apparently there's 2,000 in Scotland now, but they don't live in Ireland. So there's quite a lot of our colleagues on here from Northern Ireland. Apparently they've never lived in Northern Ireland. But and apparently in 2025, 2026, they're releasing 100 in England.
I didn't know those numbers, but yeah, I do know there are plans for Natural England to give licenses for beaver release.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen other than in a zoo. I've never seen an otter, but there's been an otter at my parents' farm caught on a wildlife camera thing. And then on Monday, I actually saw a dead one on the road. So I'm guessing otters are also increasing in numbers as well.
Yeah.
Is there any checklist around? So if you were looking of wanting to improve the water quality of your farm, is there a checklist for farmers to go through or look at?
I can't think of like a comprehensive one that covers everything. I know Flag Southwest have produced a really good one for phosphate for farmers in the River Axe in Devon that I saw the other day. And there probably would be like voluntary initiative. I think I probably have one for grassland herbicides, but then again, there's a lot of water companies and different advisory organisations operating around the country, so it would be worth looking up, work out who would have that information in your area, and then looking it up, because it would be then tailored for the issues in that area.
Okay, thank you. Has anybody else got any questions? You can either use the raise the hand function or type it in the chat.
Or comments as well.
Is Barry about to speak? You look like you were about to speak, but you didn't. Then Barry, you need to unmute yourself if you do want to speak. I'm guessing that's a no. I think you've stunned everyone to silence with all that knowledge and information, Tim. So thank you very much for Carl's just put one in. Do you have any problems with blue-green algae?
In some of our reservoirs, yes. So Wessex water, we're 75% groundwater, but in Somerset we do have 3 main reservoirs and a few smaller ones. And yes, we do have problems with blue-green algae. It's a really complex issue. It's not as simple as just there's too much phosphate going in. You've got the temperature, you've got what's being released from the sediment, you've got the flows, but yeah, we do have that issue, and it's the breakdown products getting technical, MIB and geosmin are what then cause the taste and odor issues that that can, you know, be an issue for our customers when they drink it. So, but a good place to start trying to address it is by reducing the amount of sediment and nutrient that's coming into that reservoir. And so we've got one reservoir in Somerset where we put wetlands on the intake for the feeder stream to flow into, and that's been effective at dropping some sediment out, and then the vegetation will take up a bit of the phosphate as well. I don't know whether that's, I'm happy to, you know, whether that's enough information on that, but
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Timothy. No, it's just as you understand from Northern Ireland perspective, it's been a big issue for us. So it has been over the last couple of years. So it has been, and obviously the farming community gets a bad rap for it as well. So they do, but it's a big issue. So it is for us all, and I understand that it's difficult to try and square that circle. So it is.
Yeah, and there's multiple reasons as well.
Yeah.
For you know, if you just look at the phosphorus alone, then that's wastewater, it's agricultural. Proportions will vary through the year. There's other sources, like I said, septic tanks and urban runoff. That's where we need the research and to, you know, so we're all working off the same page.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks for your question. And thanks everyone for joining us this evening. This is the last of the series for now of our Wednesdays meetings. I know it's getting a bit lighter and everyone's got some lots of work to do on the farm. So thank you for those that have joined us over the past since October time. And thank you very much, Tim, for sharing your thoughts and knowledge with us this evening. As I say, it will be recorded and we'll send out the link along with the various companies and help and advice that Tim had in his presentation, where you can just click on those to get to that knowledge. I'll share those with the recording. So if there is any companies or links that you want to click through instead of having to Google them or find them, we'll put that through so it's easy to access that. But thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you all again soon.
Well, thank you very much for everyone's time listening and for inviting me, and happy to take any follow-ups as well. If anyone wants to get in touch. So thank you very much, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks,
Thank
Tim.
you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.